Hi, guys. So, I wanted to share something a little bit different today from my normal content. But in some ways, it's kind of in alignment with my path of the work that I do. Obviously, I work as a psychic, I work as a medium, and I work as a healer. And this is to do with my own individual healing journey. And the reason why I think it's important for me to share this is I like to be quite candid when it comes to my healing journey because I really do believe that when we share our own path and how we advance individually, it could help others on their path, and it makes others feel less alone in their own experiences and what they're going through. And so it feels to me that this is now the right time for me to share it, especially as it's actually the one main area of my path right now that I'm actually working through healing. And so you're kind of joining me in on the journey. The other reason that I wanted to bring this up is that it's something that has been discussed recently in some of my other videos, and also when I've been doing the live healing sessions with Lorraine on her channel. If you aren't following Lorraine Dodder Quantum Healing already, give her a follow. Lorraine has some incredible content on there, and myself and Lorraine sometimes will hold live healing events. So keep an eye out on my channel and her channel for updates on when those will be, so you can get some lovely free healing energy. So the journey that I wanted to take you through today was my healing journey and my experiences with my genetic condition, and that is of anorexia. And the reason I want to highlight that as a genetic condition is that when it comes to a lot of different things that people are faced with on a day-to-day basis, there's a lot of education that needs to be done in certain areas where people aren't necessarily educated as much as they could be on certain things that people experience. And that is not the individual's fault, and that may not be educated. It's just within the environment that we've been in. It's just one of those things that we just haven't been. And those of us who have come to awareness, sometimes I feel it's a responsibility of ours to make people more aware so that there is more compassion for other people and their experiences. So, with that in mind, I'm going to take you through my journey, which started. I'm going to take you through my journey, and also to give you a bit more education into what anorexia is, either because you may experience it within yourself, and it could highlight that for you, so you can really look out there to hopefully get some help to educate you and help you through the condition. But equally, for those of you who may have loved ones who you may feel is struggling at the moment, and to give you some insight into maybe what you can do to help them on their path. So I'm going to start from the beginning. So I haven't always had. So when it comes to anorexia, let me start with this first. Actually, I think it's a little bit more insightful to give you a background on possibly what it is and where some of the miseducation sort of lies. So a lot of people have this misconception that anorexia is an eating disorder. However, anorexia is a genetic component within certain individuals that may lead to an eating disorder. Anorexia can actually lay dormant in our system until we put ourselves in the environment where it can actually spark it to activate, and then lead on to the individual who has the genetic component for anorexia to then develop an eating disorder as a result. So what do I mean by that? So the person that I would say is the best individual to describe this in more detail, and it's the one person that I sort of was led towards and who made the most sense to me, is an incredible woman called Shan Guisinger. And she wrote a piece that she titled Adapted to Flee Famine. And after reading that, it really made me make sense of my condition and my experiences with it. And so ultimately, someone with anorexia will have a genetic component that means that should their body go into energy deficit for whatever reason, so whether that's that they've been on a crash diet, they've started intermittent fasting, all of these things that they say are actually really beneficial for us in this day and age. Or, for example, we may lose weight unexpectedly because we've been going through a period of depression or we've had some sort of illness. What can happen for us in those moments is it can activate a dormant part of our genetic makeup, the anorexia. And when it does that, it almost reactivates a part of our mammal type sense of being. And it makes those of us who have anorexia act like we're in a famine environment, even though in this day and age, touch wood, we don't experience famine. And so how that can look is exactly like an animal would behave in that famine environment. And what do they do in that famine environment? Well, they want to get to the place of abundant food. And so they will eat very little and move quite a lot. And that has been exactly my experience for me within my anorexia. So now you can sort of understand what I mean, that having anorexia doesn't always necessarily mean that you have an eating disorder, but it certainly can do if it is activated and it's not nipped in the bud as quick as it can be. And for those of you who feel like they may be experiencing it or know of someone who they think could have that sort of genetic predisposition within them, it is my hope that you nip it in the bud as quickly as possible. For me, I've been on this journey for 27 years and I'm finally in a place that I am working my hardest to overcome and heal it. And I'll go into why in more detail in a moment. So my journey sort of started when I was younger. I didn't have any issues with food. I had a very normal relationship with food. And again, that's because my anorexia was dormant. It hadn't been activated at that point. But when it sort of got to the point that I was getting a little bit older, I carried a little bit of extra weight. But so many of us, when we're children, we do. And that's because we are going through that sort of growth spurt. We're going through puberty, anything along those lines that makes us hold on to and carry a little bit more weight. However, I was a very sensitive child, and now I've sort of moved forward on my path and do the work that I do. I can make more sense of why that is. But at the time, I couldn't make sense of it. And so I would have little remarks here and there, whether that was from children in the playground or, other individuals. And they would really, really impact and affect me when I was a child. And rather than it affecting me in a way that I would then at the time, and obviously growing up, I was born in 1984. So sort of growing up around that sort of time, it was like the latter end of the mid sort of later 90s. We didn't have like the internet where I could look for sort of like, how can I like lose weight and weight loss tips or any of that stuff. And interestingly, that wasn't actually the path that I took when I was receiving those taunts. It was more so that I actually turned to food as almost like a bit of a comfort. A lot of my sort of childhood, I can't actually think back to sort of thinking into detail of why that might have been. Why did I see the food as a comfort? But that's just how it sort of panned out at that point in time. And then it got to the point that I started to develop a little bit more. And I actually was quite developed by the time I was about 9 or 10. And I was actually going through a lot of hormonal changes by the time I was 10, 11, in terms of puberty. And so I was a little bit more advanced than other children were at that age. So with that again was something that really caused me a lot of anxiety. I was quite tall for my age. And I know that a lot of women will probably sort of relate to this, is that when I started to develop the top half of myself, one half of me was completely sort of imbalanced the other. And I found that really there's a lot of anxiety there. And the other areas of my body that I really struggled with, again, because I was quite tall, I've always had like chunkier legs. And so I've always had this anxiety around that area. And this is one of those areas that I'm working on to become more aligned with and find peace with in myself. But as these things sort of shifting around me and happening, it wasn't anything that I was taking action on at that time to do anything about. Shortly after that, I was having a lot of issues with my teeth. And so we were looking into whether I should have dental work done, if I should have a brace fitted, or something to alleviate the issues that I was facing there. I don't know if anybody's ever had that, where they've had like double teeth. So I used to have almost like vampire fangs. So they looked into a couple of options, and one of them was that they could break my jaw to bring more alignment so that my teeth sort of grow out and actually line themselves up neatly. That obviously sounded quite painful, so I didn't really want to look down that route. And then the other option was to have a head brace fitted. So obviously have braces and then wear a head brace in the evening, meaning that this would bring more alignment to my teeth so that any issues I was feeling in terms of being able to bite properly or anything along those lines, that would sort of be cleared up. As you can see, my teeth are very nice and neat now, so we can obviously see that I went for the latter option. But with that, what that meant is that when I was wearing the head brace in the evening, it was so painful. I can actually kind of, remember when you connect to sort of old experiences and you can really feel that visceral pain of what you experienced at the time. I can feel how painful they felt to me. And because of that, I wasn't able to eat. And so through that experience, I lost quite a bit of weight quite quickly. And in that time of that happening, this dormant part of my genetics activated. And understandably, then you've got people around you who are aware and highlighting the fact that you've lost a bit of weight. And the way the world has been in terms of diet culture, people are generally praised for losing weight. And even at a young age, I noticed that sort of praise from others, and there felt like a feeling of success of having achieved what I was achieving. But from that, and my activating my anorexia, we didn't know it at the time, but through that, there was just this feeling of compulsion and of wanting to carry on that act of not eating very much, and this feeling of wanting to move a lot, simply act like an animal in migration. That's exactly what it feels like when you trigger that switch within you. And that happens when those of us with that genetic trait drop below a sort of healthy weight for ourselves. And when I'm talking about this, I'm not talking about BMI scales, because they are utter bullshit. And there are a number of people out there that will agree the same. We cannot look at a chart and say whether someone is healthy or not by putting them on a BMI scale. Everybody individually has a certain weight that is healthy for them, or a weight range. And certain individuals who dip below that, who may have the genetic trait for anorexia, that's the point that we will see and know and acknowledge that we have that genetic predisposition. So when we're talking about healthy weight ranges, when I'm talking about healthy weight ranges, I am not talking about BMI charts. I'm talking about what is a healthy weight range for you and myself. And so this is what happened for me, is that because I suddenly dropped below this healthy weight range for my body, I suddenly had this compulsion to exercise. And so out of nowhere, I was wanting to walk a lot. And then I was wanting to find different ways of adding like exercise into my day in any way that I could. And this became very sort of compulsive and very addictive. But again, with that was this desire and feeling a need to eat very, very little. And this became this cycle of behavior. And from this, you can understand that my weight dropped quite considerably and quite rapidly. Now, at this point, I had joined secondary school. And I won't go into details of what I did or how I went around losing this weight, because I think that can be triggering. And also, I don't want to put any ideas into people's heads. But there were certain actions that I would do on a daily basis that meant that I was not consuming enough of my body's needs at the time. Let's put it that way. And as a result of that, my weight plummeted so much that it got to the point that I was very, very emaciated. And like I said, I'm very tall, so it was very, very obvious that I was quite emaciated. At this point, it was actually a family doctor that was one of the first ones to highlight his concern. He'd noticed, I can't remember now why I was going to sort of doctor's appointments or anything like that. But he'd highlighted concern to my parents. And it was really actually a lot because of him that I was able to sort of look into it in more detail, or my family were able to look at it in more detail and actually understand and comprehend what was happening. And so from that, I was taken out of school. And at this point, because I was so very unwell with my weight, it was considered at a point that I would be put as an inpatient. And so what that means is that someone would be put into an environment where they would almost be put into care, and would have sort of doctors working with them, counsellors working with them, people putting together a meal plan to make sure that they're eating a certain sort of amount on day to day. As you can probably understand by the way I'm talking about it, I don't really understand how it works, because thankfully I never had to go down that route. And there's always been a feeling of concern for me around individuals who maybe are treated in that way. I can't have my full judgment towards it because I don't really know. Some people will find that really, really beneficial. However, for me, my mum at the time was working from home. So it meant that I could be in an environment where I could stay at home. And what that looked like was me spending a lot of time on the sofa, not doing very much. And this, when I really, really look back to it, who I was and who I am when I have active anorexia to who I am when I have dormant anorexia is such a different person, because I look back to all the behavioral patterns of how I would go about skipping meals, not eating, exercising behind people's backs so they don't know what I'm doing. And there's a lot of ways that we manipulate not just the truth for others, but the truth for ourselves. And so I got to this space that I was at home for a long period of time. And this was between the ages of, if I have to look back, probably between the ages of 14 and 15. So I missed out on so much of my life growing up. And there's so much that I look back on and think, if only I could have done that differently. And I missed out on a lot of my education, which from my own perspective, I'm not really that disconcerted about. I've never really been one to sort of fit into conventional environment, so to speak. So I spent a lot of time at home on the sofa watching things like Arthur C. Clarke. I don't know if any of you remember that. And at the time when I was first going through the initial phase of recovery, as it were, how they sort of treat and work with anorexia is through a process of what they call nutritional rehabilitation. So simply, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's just eating. Because when our body goes through a process of malnutrition, and this is not just for people who have anorexia, but it's for people who go through any type of diet or any type of path of trying different sort of fad sort of behavioral experiences, for want of a better term, for their health or well-being. So for example, intermittent fasting. One thing that people are so miseducated on, and myself included, because it's not really out there, because of course diet culture and diet industries aren't going to tell you this. When we are in a position that we want to lose weight or are losing weight in our physical body, our body does that by cannibalizing itself. And so if you are someone who has dieted for a very long period of time, or has an eating disorder of some form, or has been diagnosed with a genetic component such as anorexia, and you have gone down that path for an extremely long period of time, what can happen is, when the body gets into a state of cannibalizing itself, and that is weight loss, if we go over that and start really sort of leaning into excessive amounts of weight loss, our body can only allow so much weight to be cannibalized before it actually has to look to different levels of the body for energy. Because ultimately what we're doing there is, when we're eating, we are consuming energy, we're consuming fuel that our body needs to keep us going on a daily basis. If we suddenly go into an energy deficit, so that's like we are reducing the calorie intake that we have on a day-to-day basis, or we go on a diet, or we start exercising more, or we start intermittent fasting, our body then looks into different areas of getting that energy from, because it's not getting it from the outside, it's in a deficit. And when it goes into extreme levels of deficit, what it starts to do is not just cannibalize the weight that you're trying to sort of get rid of, but it will also start cannibalizing your systems. So it'll start depleting your muscles, and it'll start wasting your muscles away. It will start depleting your organs. It will start affecting your skin. It'll start affecting your nails. It'll start affecting your hair. And these are all areas of which I've been affected by through my anorexia over the years. Because not only was I experiencing this when I was younger and throughout my sort of teens, but this is actually something that I have experienced for the last 27 years. And so this is what I want to talk about in more depth and expansion of understanding when it comes to what anorexia can really look like and what eating disorders can really look like as a whole. They are not always in that sort of stereotypical emaciated body. Now, I was in that state when I first was diagnosed with anorexia. And there's some sort of part of me that is grateful that I got to that state to understand that I have that genetic component, so that I know now, 27 years later, how to sort of be aware of it and to work forwards to prevent me getting into that space again. And that's my journey and path I'm on currently. And so after that sort of experience when I was 14, 15, I did get to a space where I was at a healthier weight range through my nutritional rehabilitation. I was eating a little bit more here and there. And I went through a phase of eating a lot of food. And that came off the back of having a very difficult conversation with my healthcare professional at the time. I had one difficult conversation with him that I was actually told if I didn't eat anymore, I would die. And so I remember going back home that day and just stuffing my face. And I did put weight on, and I got to the point that I was kind of told, yeah, that's absolutely fine. You know, you've got your weight range to where it needs to be. And I was kind of like dismissed off, and told, yeah, that's fine, you've got your weight up. Anyway, and I came away from that experience, and even though I'd put on weight, I just came away from that, and it just didn't really click. And so in the years following that, there were a few hiccups where if I would have things that would trigger me in my environment or something along those lines, or I would unexpectedly lose weight, or I would have a comment made by someone, and then it would just send me in that downward spiral again of that behavior. And so this continued on, well, up until now, ultimately, where if I'd been in an environment where things felt out of control, I've always been someone that struggled with situations out of my control in my environment, and then from that having this necessity of controlling the situation. That could come down to the fact that I'm a Virgo, so I like to be a little bit in control of the situation around me. But it would sort of crop back up when I would be in environments where I would feel like things were getting out of my control, and so I would almost try and control the situation around me. And the best way that I understood how to do that was to control my food and to control the amount of exercise that I was doing. Exercise in any form, whether that was just like walking, cycling, whatever I could do. But it was always this feeling of the more the better. And just this constant desire for like weight loss or whatever I could do to sort of lose a couple of pounds here and there, and that I would feel better if I lost X, Y, Z. The thing with anorexia is there's never a point that you'll feel that you've lost enough weight. The goalpost is always moved. And so there's almost this consistent feeling of when you're in that mindset of activating your anorexia, it's just this constant drive and desire to lose weight. And knowing that you're not well in terms of your physical health and well-being, but never getting to the point that you feel sick enough to do something about it. And it's a consistent theme that comes across in terms of people with anorexia, is this feel of, but I'm not sick enough. I'm not sick enough to put weight on. If I lose a little bit more weight, then I might consider it. And that was always a thing for me. If I lose another half stone, then I might consider putting weight on. I know that I'm really too thin. I know that I probably could put on some weight. I know that all my clothes are hanging off me. I know that I've suddenly got really skinny. I know I'm really bony. I know people are concerned about me. I know people are making comments. But if I just lose another half stone, then maybe I'll put on weight. But it would never be the case. I would get to that sort of half stone lower, and then the goalpost would be moved. And I've had some really, really scary moments in my experience with anorexia. And it's exactly what I sort of mentioned earlier, is as I found myself going through these sort of highs and lows of activating that part of me, that component, and I've lost a considerable amount of weight, and I've dropped my amount of food, or I've done more exercise, whatever the case may be, and my body's gone into that space of metabolizing itself. The body is so intelligent that what it does is, in those moments where we are expending more energy than we're intaking, the body does incredible things to start altering the way it operates to conserve energy. And so it will do things like, for women, it will stop your periods because, well, that's not necessary. You don't need to expend energy on that. If you're not in a body that's healthy enough to take care of itself, you can hardly take care of another, being or grow a being within you. It will, stop spending energy on hair growth or nail growth. It will adapt your metabolism to the amount that you are intaking. So this is like classic thing for people who are on yo-yo diets, for example, and they'll get to a sort of weight loss plateau, as they call it, and they're like, well, I always get down to this point and then I can't lose any more weight. And what's happening there is your body's really intelligent, and it's gone, oh, okay, this is the amount that you're intaking. Well, why do we need to have a higher metabolism then? Because you're not consuming more than 1,600 calories a day. So why do we need to have a metabolism that supports 2,000 calories a day intake? That's just energy that we don't need to waste. And so it will do something called metabolic adaptation, where it will lower the metabolism to meet the intake. And so this is why people who have been on a yo-yo diet, for example, will then start gaining on a really low intake of food and they can't work out what's happening there. It's because your metabolism and your body is so intelligent, it's drop your metabolism to meet those requirements. It will, other things that malnourishment can cause is dry, itchy skin. It can cause vision loss. It can cause bone loss. It can cause the body to take the energy from different organs. So it can shrink the size of your heart. It can affect your brain. And the reason I want to highlight all these is not only because I want to bring an awareness to the severity of what anorexia can cause and certainly eating disorders. And actually, if we're really wanting to look at it as a whole, what diets can do to us if we take them to the extreme, the amount of damage that can be done to our bodies. And so for me as an individual, the areas in which I've suffered with in the last sort of 27 years, and certainly in the last, I can't even think how many years, but certain areas that I still am faced with in my own journey is that I haven't had a regular cycle in over 4 years. In fact, in 4 years, I've had one cycle and that's it. And a lot of women will go, oh, even doctors, even healthcare professionals will say, oh, it's really nice not to have a cycle, isn't it? Oh, it's like such a relief. As tongue-in-cheek as that might sort of be considered to be, it's actually really detrimental for your body as a woman to not have a cycle. It can cause so much damage to our bones. When it comes to progesterone and estrogen, it messes with your hormones to excessive levels. But the other areas that I have been impacted with is, of course, a lot of people know that I've been diagnosed with epilepsy, and there's always been a sense of it being connected to my abilities. But there's also a sense of, well, has it been caused by me not nourishing my body enough over the years? Because ultimately, the main area that those of us who have the component for anorexia it's within our brain. It is a disorder of the brain. And so has that been caused? Has my epilepsy been caused by me not nourishing my body enough that it's ultimately created that or caused that as I guess, part of the disorder or the part of the malnourishment that I've experienced causing shrinkage in the brain? These are all sort of questions that you've got to put out there. Another area that has impacted me within is my metabolism has obviously dropped quite a lot as a result to match the intake that I was having. It's caused me to experience impacts on my heart, which has been one of my major concerns at times when I've been really, really struggling with this condition. But it causes something and can cause something called bradycardia. And what that is a very, very, very slow heart rate. And there's been times where I've been checking my heart rate, and you think a lot of people put that down to, oh, well, you've got a really athletic heart rate. That's really good, actually. That just means you're very healthy. Sometimes it means that it's actually quite the opposite and it's not healthy at all. It's just that your body hasn't got enough energy to create heartbeats, to make your heart beat or pump blood and oxygen around your body. So when you look at it from that perspective, it's really quite dangerous. And my heart rate, when it would be resting at times, it would be in the sort of like early 30s, like 34 beats a minute. Can you imagine what it would be when I'm sleeping? I wouldn't even want to know. But, these are all sort of things that you've got to consider when it comes to what we can experience when we have anorexia. And these are sort of the areas that I've been impacted with over the years. And so when it comes to my sort of own journey and any individual's journey from anorexia, what we really must understand is we don't have to be, because most people watching this video right now will look at me and say, well, you don't look like someone who's got anorexia. And that's not an ignorant comment from the person watching. And it's not any judgment towards the person watching. It's simply because we've not been educated to understand it from a vaster perspective. And the classic perspective of someone with anorexia is someone in that stereotypical emaciated body. And yes, that might be the one end of the extreme. And I certainly was at that space. And I would never want to touch the surface of that space again. And I was there not long ago. The start of this year, in fact, I was really pushing down that sort of path of becoming very, very emaciated in my physical body. But if you were to look at me right now, and for a lot of people who have a diagnosis of anorexia, we may have that sort of consideration of, but you don't look like you're unwell. You know, you've got nice shiny hair, you've got good skin, you look like you've got enough coverage on you, you look well. And that's been a comment that I've received a number of times from people on the outside. Again, no ignorance to them, it's just a lack of education. But when it comes to anorexia or eating disorders as a whole, we really have to take on what they call the HAES approach, which is the health at every size approach. And that is to understand that you can have anorexia at any size and you can have an eating disorder at any size, but it doesn't make it any less detrimental in terms of the damage that can be done to your body as a result. And where I might look okay on the outside to individuals, I know on the inside that my body is still suffering in so many areas. And it wasn't until, like I said at the start of this year, where I was going really backwards in terms of my health again. And this is, again, because I was facing a lot of big changes in my life. I left the corporate world to do the work that I'm doing now. And the reason I left the corporate world is it wasn't an environment that served me any longer in terms of where I was on my path. And that was to do with my epilepsy diagnosis. It just meant that the corporate world wasn't an environment that could cater for that part of me anymore. And so there were some big shifts and changes that were coming in. And what I found with that was a lot of anxiety that was coming forward within me. And classically, in those spaces, I would act upon those behavioral patterns that I'd done over the years, which would be to try and control the environment around me and going down that path of what made sense to me, which would be to control my food intake. And from that would come the sort of stronger compulsion for exercise. And so in doing that, I lost quite a lot of weight very, very rapidly. And so when it came to sort of March this year, that was when I was at this space again, sort of 27 years after my initial diagnosis, thinking, I've got to do something about this. This is not the first time I've been in this position. And so I really sort of knuckled down and I was working on the nutritional rehabilitation. I was working on cutting out the exercise and doing everything I could to sort of stop that taking over. And I got to a space where my first cycle in 4 years came back, and it was honestly, I actually, and I think a lot of people can relate to this who've been in this position. I actually did start crying because it was really quite an emotional experience, because it's a confirmation of the work that you're putting in is working. And also it just shows how incredible your body can be, and that it knows, it's so smart, it's so intelligent, it knows what it's doing, it knows what it needs to do to heal you. And so I was noticing all these sort of prominent and positive changes happening within me. And then things started to shift again, and I had some more things sort of coming up as anxieties within my life. Now, over the past number of years, I have worked on myself so much in terms of my individual healing journey. And so there's so many layers of myself that have been cleared and healed, so that certain environmental triggers that I would experience no longer trigger me anymore. And I'm no longer in certain environments that would not be in alignment with me either. And so when I might be sort of experiencing these sort of triggers coming up again, I won't always act in the ways that I may have done so before. However, when these sort of anxieties came back up, it was around about June, July of this year. It was really interesting because whilst I was reacting differently, I actually went backwards in terms of my being on top of what I was eating and my exercise regime, more so what I was eating. And it was really interesting because it was almost like I had a bird's eye perspective on my behavior. And I think this has happened for a reason. I'll go into that in a minute. And so what I noticed was that I started to cut back again, and I was starting to calorie count again, and I was starting to sort of cut back on certain foods that I was eating, or, not eating my full portion of my dinner that I would put out, and things along those lines. And like I said, but I was almost having like a higher space perspective of it and being aware of it. And so this would be like a couple of months in, and it got to about November, and it just clicked, and I'd realized that I'd gone down that path again of reactivating my anorexia. And again, the body is so intelligent with how it can communicate to us what it needs. And so when someone is in a space of malnourishment, and from my perspective, what the body does to tell us that is it makes us become almost obsessive with food because it wants us to seek out food. It knows it needs fuel. And so how that might look, and how it certainly looked for me, is that we might find ourselves wanting to seek out, TV programs about cookery, or we might find ourselves online watching, is it mukbangs or whatever they call them? People sort of doing those mukbangs and just being obsessed with watching them. Or you might find yourself like, this is a random one that showed up for me so much, dreaming about food, or drifting off to sleep and thinking, I'd really like to eat that sort of like cake or something along those lines, or daydream about food. That is your body intelligently telling you that you're not fueling it enough. And that would be a prominent one for me. And so this started to sort of crop up in my awareness more and more and more. And I notice it this time around because I become aware of my patterns of behavior. The more that we sort of work through our own individual healing, the more prominent it becomes the parts of us that aren't healed. And so I became aware of this. And now the interesting thing this time was my environment that I was in was nowhere near the environment that I would have been in before, that would have meant that I would have tried to control it to the degree that I would go down the levels of reducing my food, or, trying to sort of lose weight or anything along those capacities. It didn't even serve it. And so even though I had these sort of little anxieties in here and there, it wasn't anything that would push me down to that level. So I found it quite curious, and I actually was starting to ask questions about it, and I was really curious, and I really do think that it happened for the perspective of allowing me to know how far I'd come, but equally highlighting to me certain things that hadn't yet been healed. But that because I'd come so far on my healing journey, I was ready to heal. And so this brings me up to pretty much today. And for the last month, I've been very much on that healing journey again with my anorexia. Now, as this is a genetic component within me that is either active or it's dormant, and moving forward, I very much am focused on making it dormant and keeping it dormant, to finally get me to that space of food freedom and almost like body freedom, but it's where I am now, sort of 27 years later, and finally at this space, I'm ready to heal fully in that space in my life. But again, it's exactly like I mentioned earlier, is that someone experiencing an eating disorder or an anorexia diagnosis or a bulimia diagnosis or whatever sort of diagnosis they may have that is in alignment with some sort of complaints with a disordered manner of eating or a compulsion with exercise, is that we've got to really remember is it doesn't always look like the stereotypical emaciated body. It can impact anybody at any size, male, female, it doesn't matter. It's not it's not sort of I can't think of the word off the top of my head, but it doesn't sort of choose, the body that it wants to reside within. It can impact anybody, any way, shape, or form. But what we've really got to remember is the damaging effects of how it can impact our body in the ways that we're not educated. And so we could look at somebody who may look like myself, perfectly healthy on the outside, but we don't understand and know how much damage their body may have been caused on the inside. Exactly as I mentioned earlier, I'm in a position where I'm trying to get my regular cycle back. I am trying to increase my metabolism. I am trying to improve my heart rate because that's still very low. My circulation is not fun in this English weather. For many years, I have had very, very cold hands and cold feet. And I don't know if you can see it on screen. I've got a chilblain there. I thought only really, really, really old people got these, but no, I get chilblains. And that's because my circulation is really, really poor. Because, why expend energy on trying to heat up your extremities? It isn't considered important in the body when it's trying to keep the organs alive. And so it's that sort of remembering that we don't have to look deathly unwell to have caused damage to our bodies. And so I'm going through this process right now of nourishing my body enough in the way that it wants. And what that looks like is not what is considered, what the government thinks is the normal, okay amount of food. But everybody's body is individual in terms of what it needs on a day-to-day basis based on the requirements at the time. And mine right now is needing that nutritional rehabilitation to get to a space that it can start running optimally again. And so to a lot of people, that is going to look like more food than others. And certainly it's something that is a discomfort with me at the moment because it's something that obviously I've conditioned my brain for many years is not okay, is from a result of that is probably putting on weight. But for many years, my focus has been weight loss and being as thin as I possibly can be. And so there is a discomfort there when it comes to me thinking, okay, well, I'm probably going to put weight on as a result of having to go down this path of healing and nourishing my body and giving it the fuel that it needs. But there's also part of me that knows I have to come to peace with that because I'm very much in the mindset and focus that this is the last time that I'm going to go down this path of healing, and damned if I'm going to go backwards again and go around these cycles because they become so exhausting after a period of time that it's just, you just have enough of it. And that's exactly where I got to. I just had enough, and I just got to the point that, do you know what, if it means that I've got to have cellulite on my legs, if it means that I've got to have weight where I didn't want weight before, if it means that I can't wear certain clothes that I want to wear, so be it. Because if I get my health back fully as a result, then that's something that I can learn to make peace with. And so that's where I am right now. I'm on that journey of healing once and for all and recovering once and for all. And I don't know where this journey is going to take me. I don't know how long it's going to take my body, but I'm honoring it to whatever it needs to do in the time that it needs to do it. And I really hope that that's given people some more insight into my own journey so far. And hopefully that will help them a little bit more to understanding, if that's something they're going through themselves or a loved one's going through. And if you've got any questions for me, then obviously please feel free to let me know in the comments. And another person that I would really recommend for anybody who's wanting a little bit more insight into this area, who's written some amazing books and also has got a lot of content on here, is a lady called Tabitha Farrar. So I will share her details in the content as well, in the notes below as well. But I really hope that me sharing my experience and my journey will help at least one person. And yeah, I welcome you to join my journey, however that's going to pan out. It's an unusual one, and I never thought I get to the point that I'd be someone who would be able to embrace it fully. But I'm hoping that this time that is something that I'm going to do. So thank you for listening, and I'm sending you all lots and lots of love. Thank you.